Is your soul ready for the truth? Welcome to Be a Slayer, the award-winning spiritual podcast that takes on all the hard topics. Raw, unfiltered, and authentic. No spiritual or relationship issue is off limits. We discuss everything from sex and consent to equality, grief, death, and the spirit world. On Be a Slayer, we will unmask all the taboos. So if you're ready to get right with yourself so you can be right with others, then stay right here, because the Be a Slayer podcast is for you. Now, here's your host, spiritual empath, shaman, and multiple award-winning best-selling author, Tracy Dunblazer.
Hi, good afternoon. This is Tracy Dunblazer, and welcome to Be a Slayer. I am broadcasting live from the Conscious Life Expo here at the LAX Hilton. It's going to be for the next 3-4 days. We've got Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday for after show. We have all kinds of workshops and really groovy things going on here today. And this is the first year where we are doing a live broadcast from a live podcast room, and I'm the first live podcaster. Anyway, so I'm really glad to be here, and I have a really important topic to talk with you today. You know, if you're not familiar with Be a Slayer, I seek to talk about topics that are difficult or that people, sometimes they've become taboo culturally, or we've been indoctrinated to feel like it's inappropriate to talk about certain things. And today we're talking about grief. If you know me even a little, you know that grief is my superpower. As an empath, I've grieved a lot in my life. And I recently wrote a book called Transformative Grief, an ancient ritual of healing for modern times. And if you don't know, if you were somehow with your head in the sand somewhere, on January 7th, after midnight, January 7th, here in California, we had 2 huge major fires take place, wildfires, one in Eaton Canyon and one in the Palisades. And you probably know by now that both of those communities, the community of Altadena and the community of the Palisades, were completely wiped out. That's not even exaggerating. And I actually happened to live in Pasadena. I was in the warning zone. There was 2 zones when the fires began to happen. A friend of mine called me, my neighbor, and she said, hey, Altadena's burning. You might need to evacuate. And I was like, okay. This is like 7:30 in the evening, and I had no idea of what was going on. And so I went and looked out my bedroom window, and I could see the fire. It looked like it was happening, a block over. It was pretty terrifying. And so I was like, oh, okay. So I called another friend. I got off the phone with her and called another friend. And I was home by myself at the time, and I had 2 dogs and 3 cats that I was taking care of. And I just started organizing things, getting my go bag ready. Here's the interesting thing. Do you know, all of this time I have been in Southern California? One of the things they encourage us to do is to prepare for big disasters. But, our big claim to fame are earthquakes. So I don't know what the hell these wildfires think they're doing, encroaching on the big earthquake trauma. So I was prepared for an earthquake, but I was not prepared for a fire or to run for my life. So packed up the car, made sure that the dogs were in their harnesses and the cats were, like, I knew where they were, and I had their boxes ready. And we just waited. We were out of my neighborhood, luckily, was only out of power for a few hours that night. But for 6 days, I didn't sleep. I woke up every 30 minutes to check the fire map to see if maybe we were going to be evacuated. 4 or 5 days into it, a couple of times they sent us evacuation notices, but it wasn't for my actual neighborhood. So you get that, that 911 thing on your phone that rings through. Anyway, my point is, it was terrifying. And when you're terrified, but you've got to be functional, you go into hypervigilant mode, right? You kind of your body has the ability to surpass oftentimes an anxiety or a grief response or fight or flight in order to be present and pay attention to what you need to do. And everybody within earshot of the wildfires here in California, it's been exactly a month today. Today's February 7th, so it's been exactly 1 month since that big trauma began. And now people are starting to understand how the trauma affected their bodies, affected their mind, affected their heart, their emotions, their beliefs. I know one of the things I want to talk about today is that everybody who, if you witnessed it, if you know people, if you were affected by it directly or indirectly, or if you were a person who lost everything or something, or you had, your property was damaged, or where you lived became damaged. No, it doesn't matter to the degree at which you were affected by the fire. There is a grief response that your body goes through, that your heart goes through, that your mind goes through. And sometimes, excuse me, sometimes people don't really recognize exactly what those grief responses are. And so I want to talk a little bit about that today. So we're going to start, of course, with, so for me, I was directly affected. The air was affected in my space. I was hypervigilant for those 6 days. Once I knew we were safe, and it took me almost 2 weeks to start to unpack the car and to feel comfortable enough that I could unpack the car and I wasn't going to have to, flee for my life. So once that started to happen, my brain was just pure fog, completely foggy. Couldn't focus, couldn't do anything, didn't want to do anything. I actually binge watched. I binge watched an entire show for 12 hours one day, a series. And it was the only thing that would bring me solace. So that's one response, right? They're the people who lost their things. Some are having big grief responses in deep emotion. But a lot of them, when you've had something like this happen, you are now moved into dealing with the state, dealing with the county, dealing with the city, dealing with the police, dealing with, we had the guard that came and they surrounded the neighborhood so that we didn't have looters. Anyway, so if you were a person who was directly affected and you had enormous loss, you've now been moved into hypervigilant focus and trying to figure out where to stay, how to make yourself safe. Maybe you had to go to a shelter, right? When those things happen, you only focus on what you need to do to get yourself through that next moment. There's no real long-term thinking. There's just short-term action focused. What can I do to get myself what I need to survive today? And then there are the people who were watching. Maybe you're one of those folks who was in another part of the world or in another part of the country. I had many friends call me and tell me that they were crying for me all day. They knew I was okay. I was communicating with them, but they were feeling the deep stress that I couldn't feel, and that the people who were being affected by the fires could not afford to feel. Right? And that's something that's really important regarding grief, is that there is a transpersonal telepathic component that when the people who are experiencing the trauma, they can't feel those big feelings, and so they transmit to other people who can. And that's a gift, and it is something to honor yourself if you're one of those people who did that, right? If you're one of those people who just watched the news and cried, or prayed, or felt just as powerless as the rest of us did. That's one of the relationships to grief, is that when you're in a situation like that, you feel powerless, and that there is this system. In this case, it was a fire. It was a fire NATO. I'm sure you guys saw the pictures of the fire NATOs. That was ridiculous. It was so ridiculous to see how the winds growled that night. It was really powerful, and to see all of that stuff. Now, one of the other interesting, so we're going to talk about specific grief responses. Let's say you, a friend of mine had their child was in the Palisades going to school when the fires broke out, and they had to be evacuated. And then they got stuck on the PCH for like 4 hours and couldn't go anywhere. They witnessed the bulldozer pushing the cars off the cliff to make room. And now they're experiencing a grief response. So some of the grief responses that a child would experience if they were witness or participated in some way, they don't really have the relationship to birth and death as you do. They don't have experience with it in the same way. But irritability, not being able to sleep, not feeling safe, not knowing how to communicate the fact that they don't feel safe, wanting to sleep all the time, acting out, being belligerent, being nonsensical. Those are all ways that, children and adults behave when they're not able to grieve, or they don't really understand that what they're experiencing is a response to the trauma that they endured. Now, one of the other interesting things that I thought was when people were far away and witnessing this, and I've had 2 or 3 people come up to me and say, oh, look, I have a question. Wonderful. We'll get to these in just wonderful. So I've got an audience here. You guys can't see all of them, but they're here, and they've got a few questions. But I want to finish what I was saying. So when people, there are people around the country and around the world who also have experienced recent tragedies, like tornadoes that took out the city, or people who went through Katrina, or all of that, the flooding in North Carolina. A lot of people who have already experienced, been through a natural disaster once or twice, are being re-triggered just from witnessing what we were going through, and they re-experience that sense of powerlessness. So when you feel powerless, one of the things that you can do is taking a deep breath and bringing your breath all the way into your body, and recognize that you are here, you are active, you can take action, you can do something that you need to do, and remember your power. Sometimes when we look at something outside of us that's so big that we can't comprehend, we lose sight of what we can do, the small actions we can take. If you're a person who's still feeling powerless, you can take small actions to help others. Anything that you can do to volunteer your time. Currently, I'm fostering 2 cats because that's what I can do. Can't really deal with humans, but I can definitely deal with cats. So I've these folks that I met them on Nextdoor, and they needed somebody to uh, house their 2 cats because their grandmother lost her home and didn't. Well, they lost use of the home. They're going to have it completely remediated from the smoke and all of that. So they're in the middle of that process, and their cats are safe with me. So that's something that I could do, and it was helpful to feel like I was even doing just a little something. Okay, so we have a couple of questions from the audience. Oh, this is a good one. Somebody asked, when does grief end? That is a great question. So grief has many lives and many cycles. Grief doesn't necessarily end, but its goal is to transform you until you feel at ease with the trauma. You feel at ease with what has happened to you, until you have walked all the way through and processed all of your feelings, your thoughts, your ideas, and your beliefs about what happened. So you can experience grief emotionally. You can feel it through anger. You can feel it through being hypervigilant or incredibly mental, like thinking through things as opposed to feeling through things. You can, once you have worked through completely everything around what happened. In my book, Transformative Grief, I talk about the 3 circles of grief. And the first circle of grief is the trauma, your direct relationship to the thing that happened. The next is who you became because of that thing. Choices you made, feelings you had, what happened because that happened to you. That's another circle of grief. That's something that you've got to eventually work through. And then finally, your relationship to the outside world and how that thing transformed you. So once you've gone through all 3 circles of grief, you will feel complete, and you won't feel triggered when something happens or when you feel powerless. Now, just FYI, grief is a natural part of transitioning from one belief to another, transitioning from one experience to another. It's all about transitioning. And so we are always experiencing some form of transition that usually will require some form of grief as well. So just know that, not everybody experiences it like that. Certainly that was my experience because I'm an empath. So I feel everybody's stuff, my stuff from 10,000 years ago, history, I feel it all. So as you work through those circles of grief, sometimes new grief comes up. So just know that it's a natural part of life, and it actually is helpful to you. It helps you to de-stress. It shifts your body. It helps your body to realign itself with a new frequency. It allows more light into the body. Anyway, so that was a great question. Thank you. Okay, so somebody wants to know how they can cope with grief. So, well, the idea is to not cope with grief, but to feel it. Certainly we all do. So for me, I was in shock for about 3 weeks, couldn't focus, couldn't do anything. And how I coped with that was I did mindless things. I watched television. I stayed in bed as long as I wanted to. I stayed focused on the little menial tasks that I knew were my responsibilities. That was all I could do. That's what I did. People oftentimes, it's easy to use substances. It's easy to, I know for me, it was very interesting that hypervigilant shock that I was in. I did not want to drink. I don't do anything else. Occasionally I enjoy a drink, but I did not want to drink at all. In fact, I still really don't. I don't really, I don't want to relax, right? But that's what it feels like. I don't want to relax. I want to make sure that I'm hypervigilant and prepared for whatever might come. So know that those are all coping strategies. Your coping strategies are going to change based on where you're at in life, what your circumstances are, what your environment is. The safer that you feel, the more comfortable you feel, the more emotional you will allow yourself to be. And sometimes it takes time to get into that. I cried. My eyes are all puffy. I cried for the first time last night. I hadn't cried in a month. And I certainly didn't cry while it was happening because, again, I needed to be hypervigilant. So, trust your body and what it's telling you, what it's telling you that it needs. You're going to need to drink a lot more water. You're going to need to really focus on nutrition, eating things that are not wasting calories, but eating things that are good for you. By all means, if you need to do the sugar or fat, those are, comfort foods are grief's best friend. But you also want to make sure that you compensate for any of that by, if you can just get up and move every hour, just make sure that you're keeping your body moving and that you're drinking lots of water. Okay, that was a great question too. So here we go. Well, this is how do I get over this loss? So over time, it doesn't go away with time, but over time, you will be able to release your attachment to your things and to the loss. When we cry for 10 minutes or more, it actually changes the neurons in our brain. So the more you grieve, the more detachment it creates, the more it opens your heart. When your heart is activated, it actually creates these really lovely chemicals that make you feel at peace and at ease. And so the more you cry, the more that helps with that. And the more it allows you to be able to release, again, what you experienced and your attachment to it. Consider, there are people who hold on to these kinds of things for years, because when you have felt that powerless, when your life has been threatened in that way, being hypervigilant is the only thing that soothes that. And so people, they want to remain hypervigilant. They want to remain in a position to, be at the ready should, things blow up again. So that is just a natural part of it. So don't worry about getting over the loss. Look at making your experience of that loss your friend and your companion for as long as it needs to stay with you. When you can do that, you can move forward in your life. You can function. You can thrive. You can enjoy life. And still recognize that you've experienced something so powerful that, there might be some attachment to it for a long time. Okay, that was a good one. This is good. How can I support someone who is grieving? So one of the most important things to do to somebody who's grieving, and especially regarding the fires, listen to them. Don't discount what they've said. Listen to their grief, to their frustration, to their pain. Do your best to not respond with, well, at least you have your house, or, well, at least you had a shelter to go to, or, well, at least. Do not say, well, at least at all, ever. Don't do it. Just don't do it. Anytime you well, at least somebody, what you're doing is you're discounting how they're feeling. And you're probably doing that because you're uncomfortable hearing about it. You know what? You got a right to that. You can say, hey, you know what? I am under such stress myself that I'm uncomfortable listening to your story. I'm so sorry, but I can't I can't do that for you today. Somebody in grief, they get that. They don't have extra for a lot of people at all now, you know? So be honest. Be honest with where you're at. If if you say to somebody, hey, I'm there for you, anything that you need to be for them. Be there for them with anything they need. If you say something, you need to back it up with action. A lot of people have a lot of pride when it comes to getting their needs met. And just because they've been through a major tragedy doesn't lessen that, doesn't lessen their pride, doesn't lessen that for them. So to reach out and ask a friend for help is not something that comes easy to most people. So if you extend that, be specific. What can I do for you? Or say, hey, I've got a room that you can stay in and you can stay there for 3 weeks, right? Or, hey, I can take care of your animals and I can do it for this long. Or, hey, I am happy to bring by a meal for you and your family. Where are you? When can I do that? Right? And then follow it through. But to do the just open-ended blanket, anything you need, I'm there for you, it's actually not helpful. In fact, sometimes I know for me, when I'm in this space of shock and trauma, I find that irritating. Like I said, if you give me something definitive that you can do and it's something that I need, great. Do that and follow through with it. But don't leave me with this open-ended thing that now I have to think of one more thing about what I need to do, which is tell you what I need. I know it sounds counterintuitive, but again, people are in a unique mental and emotional position after having experienced this level of powerlessness. And it kind of puts you in a position of power to be able to offer something. So again, do your best to listen. Do your best to, if they don't want to tell their story, talking about it actually does help. It really does. It gets the energy moving. A lot of people feel uncomfortable when they start to talk about it and then they get emotional. That's the goal. You want to cry about it. You want to move it through your body. You want to begin the process of detaching from how life was before those events happened, right? Because that's what you're doing. That one night, that one moment changed everything for many people. And you don't get over that. Kids will never forget that, and they'll tell their kids, right? That's one of those occurrences in life that shapes who a person is and how they look at life. So, have compassion for yourself and have compassion for others as well. Okay, let's see what else I got here. Oh, this is a good one. Why do I feel so impacted when I wasn't directly impacted by the fire? That's a great question. We touched on it a little bit, but there is this thing called transpersonal empathy. So there could be several reasons for it, but transpersonal empathy is when you are in a safe place and you are witnessing somebody's trauma, or you're aligning with them, you're connecting with them, that energy transfers to you and you work it out. You work it through. You take it and you cry it out. Another reason is not the word that I wanted. Another way that another reason, I guess a reason was the word. That was a word I wanted, and I actually thought of it. Go figure. So when you witness something, you relive it. And if you are a person who has actually experienced a any kind of trauma. It will dredge up those feelings of your trauma if they're not completed yet. Oftentimes, another thing that we tend to do, our brains look at that and go, wow, I don't ever want that to happen. And then we start to imagine what we would do in that scenario, right? What would I do? And when you start to think about what you would do in the scenario, you start to feel that in your body. You can feel it in your shoulders, you can feel it in your heart, you can feel it in your gut. So it's really important, if you are one of those people out there who you weren't impacted by the fire directly, but you witnessed it, you watched the news, you have people, friends that experience things, whatever your circumstances is, wherever you are, remember to tell yourself every day, you are safe, you are safe, you are well, things are good. Remind yourself, give yourself the benefit of seeing all of that energy just drain from your body, all of that anxiety drain right out of your body. It's lovely when you can help somebody feel something that they're not able to right now, but you still need to take care of yourself. And so you have to remember to, if you go there for a few minutes or a little while, then pull yourself back. Remind you who you are in your life. You are safe. You are comfortable. Everything is okay. And you don't have to feel guilty about that. Grief is not a competition, right? How something affects you it's not a competition. The people who lost everything aren't the winners. They have a special place. That is a deep experience that they are enduring, and you may not fully know what that is. But just because you don't know what it is doesn't mean that your grief isn't valid, right? Somebody's grief is not more important than somebody else's grief. It's just important to understand that during grief, we all experience it in different ways. And the more that we can recognize that in ourselves and in others, the more we can honor them by giving them what they need. Okay, so I'm going to take 2 more questions and then we're going to begin to wrap it up. Let's see. Oh, this is a good one. Oh gosh, there's so many good questions. Okay, how does one talk to kids about grief? That's a great question. I think the most important thing is to, if you have a child or know a child who is impacted by the LA fires in some way, or they watched it on the news, or like I said, my friend, they ran for their life. So you have to not remind, because that kid most likely doesn't really know about grief. So tell them it's okay to have big feelings. Tell them it's okay to not, if they're not feeling anything at all. Help them understand that anything, like maybe they feel numb, maybe they feel bored, maybe they feel irritable, maybe they're acting out. All of those are grief responses. All of those are grief responses. I want to align it with children, but adults do the exact same thing, right? There are a lot of adults out there who have lived many, many, many years and never really experienced any big traumas. And so their grief responses are going to be very similar to that of a child's. They may have more information, they may have witnessed more, but you have to let the child know that, hey, what you experienced is not a regular thing. It's not average. It was big, and you're going to remember it for the rest of your life. So you're going to have lots of different feelings about it. And all of those feelings that you have are okay. What's not okay is to treat others poorly because you feel bad, right? You can't yell at mom and dad and be mean to your brother because you're upset. But you can be upset, and you can scream and cry and do whatever you need to do to get it out of you. but we're going to ask that you are respectful of the other of your friends and other family members. There's a thing called grief, and it's when we have big feelings, and you have a right to those. In fact, they're important for you. They keep you healthy. Right? So those are some of the ways that you can talk to a kid to help them understand that this thing they experienced is something they're going to remember for the rest of their life, and it's not like any other thing that they may have experienced before. Now, if you have a kid who lost a parent or lost their home, or they've already experienced other traumas in their life, this could be a huge trigger for them. And in that case, oftentimes you have a lot bigger grief responses, a lot bigger emotions, sometimes a lot more acting out. That's when you sometimes you want to consider joining a grief group, right? I've actually led grief groups for children, giving them a safe place to talk about their feelings. Maybe not with a family member. I mean, I always appreciate that in the family dynamic, it's good if you can have an open space where you can let your kid talk and you won't judge them for it, right? If you have a safe space for them to be able to say whatever they want. If you can't do that, or the other parent or other siblings in the family can't do that, that's okay. There are grief groups out there for children that really help to give a kid an anonymous experience where they can say how they feel and they don't know anybody. Anyway, but the idea is to give them permission. And like I said, if they've already experienced in a short period of time other big traumas, you might look at getting professional help, because it's something that's not easy, and especially during the formative years, there's a lot of bad coping strategies that it would be good to gear them away from that. Okay. This is a good one. Okay, so what can I do when the grief comes up again? Grief comes in waves. It goes in cycles. So you can work through a little bit. You can kind of move through. You can think you're good. You can go for a month or two and everything is just, you're moving right along, and then you see something and it triggers you. Understand that sometimes I liken grief to a 200-pound bag of rice. And every time, so this was like a 10,000-pound bag of rice. The LA wildfires were huge. Now, maybe you only have the 200-pound bag or just the 100-pound bag. And every time you grieve, it's like eating a bowl of that rice, like processing it through, right? That grief is finite. If you keep doing the grief work and you keep eating that bowl of rice, every new bowl of rice, when you're hungry, when you can, right? Every time you do that, eventually you're going to get to the end of that bag for you. And then you'll be done with that. Now, other things may have come up. Like I said, there are 3 circles of grief. So there are different relationships to grief, different perspectives, and there's the mourning process. The mourning process is when we actually transition to living a life that we have today, not in relationship to the one before, right? The fires happened and there was the life that people had before, and now there's the life they have now. And the mourning process is getting you from the old life to the new life, and to help you to be present. So the other important thing here is don't worry about being positive all the time. Positivity is overrated. Sometimes you just need to tell people to fuck right off. I'm not condoning that, but here's the thing. If you have big feelings, you have a right to them. I don't suggest you take them out on others, but you have a right to feel as angry, as frustrated as you do. And one of these other questions here was about what do I do when I have a crisis of faith? This is a big crisis of faith for a lot of people. How did this happen to me? What did I do to deserve this? You didn't do anything to deserve it, but it happened. So because it happened, you are left to deal with it, and you have a right to be as mad as hell about it. When you allow yourself to be mad, eventually it's going to break through to being sad that it happened. And then eventually that sadness is going to break away to forgiveness to yourself, to the, beings that exist. We want to blame other people. That's also a big part of this. There's lawsuits now. And I mean, not to give into conspiracy theories, but I definitely know some things. Some people, there was arson involved, and some people are going to need to be held accountable, but that's different than, the perfect storm of all these particular circumstances that came together that created this thing. And that it doesn't serve you to hold somebody, to blame somebody for that thing, to hold on to that blame. Absolutely. When you are grieving is not the time to try to hold somebody else accountable, because you're not always clear-headed. You've got to work through your stuff first so that you can be clear-headed and really address what happened, why it happened, who may have made it happen. Those are some very powerful questions, and we're all going to be asking those questions. But when you're grieving is not really the time to do that. So when you have a crisis of faith, which, I like to think of it as, when you're down on the ground and you can't go down any further, that's the point at which you have to shift your perspective. For you are the one you've been waiting for. You are your savior, right? You have to give yourself the power. And when you do, you will get in touch with that omnipotent part of yourself, that thing we call God, right? You'll get in touch with that once you empower yourself to recognize who you are. Recognize the badass you are, because you hold all the cards and all the power. Okay, I'm going to do one more question because these are so good. Okay. She says, I'm embarrassed to say that I'm not ready to go back to normal. How do I avoid social engagements? Well, you don't have to avoid them. You are free to just say no. Look, there is no shame in saying, I am struggling and I am not ready to leave this house, so I'm not going to unless I have to. Right? I mean, if you can work from home, if you are honest with the people that you work with, or your boss, or your family, your friends, this is not a time of celebration. And it may, that feeling of desire of celebration, or even normalcy, and normalcy is not, we don't get back to normal. What we do is our body regulates, and it regulates in such a way that we then feel that we recognize how we feel, right? And after this huge trauma, we lost that. Your body lost that. Your body has to recover. And isolation is one of the things that we crave, so that our mind, body, and spirit can align and integrate with each other. And oftentimes that also requires grieving. A lot of people don't feel comfortable to go out, to be around friends or whatever. And then they start talking about what's happening and they burst into tears. One of my colleagues, I've been following her online. She lost everything. And God bless her. She is putting it out there every day. She writes her morning notes so that she can let everybody know where she's at. And that's one of the things. She's like, I got out of the house today. It was really awkward. I wanted to go back and go to bed. And then I really couldn't go to bed because I missed my bed. Like everywhere she looked, there were things that made her sad. And, she went to the grocery store, and then she saw some people who also lost their homes, and they all cried together in the grocery store. That is just how it's going to be. And there is no shame in that. You have to champion yourself. It's not anybody else's job to do it for you. It's your job. Be honest with where you're at, challenge yourself a little every day, get up out of the bed, go to the kitchen, have something to eat, take a big glass of water, and go back to bed if that's what you need to do. But give yourself permission to do what you need to do and to be honest about it. And we don't always have a perfect family or perfect friends. And if somebody gives you pushback, which they might, say, I understand your frustration with me, but I can't help you with that. I understand you'd like me to be different right now, and I can't. Right? Set your boundary, make it clear, and give yourself permission to be okay with that. And if they're really friends, then they'll find a way to be okay with that, and they'll work it out on their own. It's not your job to help them work through that, even if they're your husband or your wife or your girlfriend or your boyfriend or whatever. Children. You have to be honest, set the boundary, be clear, and then give them the benefit of the doubt that they'll find a way to work through it. Okay, well, this has been such an amazing show. Thank you so much. I love the Conscious Life Expo and everybody, my huge audience here today. Yay! It's so fantastic. This is Be a Slayer. My name is Tracy Dunblazer. You can find me at tracydunblazer.com. And if you're going to be here at the expo at any time, we're in booth LL4 and LL3. I'm also representing the Coalition of Visionary Resources, which you know all about cover. So also you can tune in at 5:30 this evening. I will be interviewing Karen Reese. She is a celebrity psychic medium, and I will be interviewing, and we have something that we're going to share on air at that time. So tune in to Chatcast at that time. And thanks again for tuning in. Love y'all. And it has been fantastic. If you have any thoughts or questions about grief, reach out to me, and by all means, pick up Transformative Grief. It actually addresses every kind of grief, everything that we can grieve. It's a manual, and there's lots of good tips for people who you might not be grieving, but people who are. So it's a great resource to have. So definitely reach out and get that, and have a fantastic rest of your afternoon.